Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Ladies and gents, welcome back to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have you here. And of course, this is the show where great business happily collides with great dentistry. Today, we're having a conversation that is of a really interesting nature. My guest today is Penny Burke, and Penny is the author of a book called Forced Focus. She's a communications expert and she's a leading advocate for behaviour change, and she helps organisations of all shapes and sizes, private and public, affect behaviour change and communicate that really effectively. You can find Penny at essencecoms.com.au, and if you want to follow her on Twitter, it's at Penny Burke, and she's got a lot of really wonderful insights about what's working in large business and how to translate that into effective strategies for smaller businesses, including health businesses like dental practices. Penny, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I'm delighted to be here.
Look, it's really good because we were having a conversation off air and I didn't hit the record button, and there were some absolute gems that you were sharing there. But before we kind of pick up that thread and get on with it, I do want to ask you a little bit about your backstory, because I'm always curious about people's paths, how they get to the work that they do. It's not the obvious career choice to be talking about behaviour change. How did you find your way into that space?
Well, I started out in advertising, so I'm assuming that some of your membership would know some of my most famous ads. I'm assuming there might even be somebody out there called Jan. And so to Jan, I always apologise ahead of time. We had to call her something. So that, of course, was the quite famous Not Happy Jan ad for Yellow Pages. I also worked on, in fact, one of my first ever ads was Mr. Hart, What a Mess, for Stainmaster carpets.
Yeah.
And so those in Victoria would know about milk legendary stuff, which was Randy Milkman that bonked half the neighbourhood on the strength of milk. So I started my career in advertising, which was a fantastic, just a wonderful career, and lots and lots of fun. I would hesitate to suggest more fun in those days than it probably is now, but it was great. And then I really became very interested in the whole way that people behaved, and the fact that you could put an ad on television, and just even by virtue of the power of great advertising, people would start buying your product. And I really found that a fascinating thing. And what is it that makes somebody change their behaviour and buy something differently tomorrow, as I often say, than they did yesterday? And then even in social behaviour, if you're asking someone to not drink and drive or use less water, then what is it that makes somebody do that? So I got more and more interested in the research aspect of it. I had a couple of little men who are now 17 and 15. Advertising is not, in those days, a very supportive job for women, and decided that would be better if I started my own business where I had more control over my life and my times, and that was 13 years ago, and we now employ a staff of 5. So.
Okay, well, that's fantastic, and I can't let the conversation move on without referring back to Not Happy Jan, because that saying is etched into the collective memory of millions of Australians. And so, firstly, you must feel incredibly proud when you hear someone repeat that back just in a social setting, like, oh, Not Happy Jan. That must bring a smile to your face every single time.
It certainly does. And as I talk about to other people in this, when you've worked in advertising and you've been part of something that has become part of the Australian vernacular, and we would have to be honest, all of us who worked in that, it wasn't obviously me on my own, would say that none of us thought that it would make its way to become as famous as that when we looked at it on paper. And I think that's a really good thing for businesses to understand as well, is that sometimes your marketing effort, whatever form it is, and we'll talk a little bit about the different forms of outputs that you could put together as a small business marketer. But sometimes there is a healthy dose of art that's mixed in, and much more so than science. You can just get a bit lucky. And I often tell the story that in that ad, I'm sure those of you who do remember it, if you think about that, that was a book close ad, we call. So when back in the days when we actually used Yellow Pages, you had a printed book, who can believe that? You used to advertise book close pretty much as demand stimulation. So that's how Yellow Pages work. So you told everybody you must get in the book because it's closing on this date. And if you don't, you miss out. And then every year we actually pulped the book, or Yellow Pages pulped it, and when we reprinted and went again. And really that was the demand management tool, was the behavioural focus of going, you will miss out if you don't get in. And then customers won't be able to find you. Now, I have literally done thousands of book close campaigns in my time. And that one, if you imagine that script on paper, woman comes into work, sits down, new Yellow Pages has been delivered, opens it, runs her finger down, sees that their name's not in there, runs to window to yell at Jan retreating down alleyway, not happy Jan. I mean, I will be honest and say that none of us went, wow, that's going to work its way into the Australian vernacular. But we were a little bit lucky on the day of shooting that, as the woman whose name's actually Barbara kind of slid the window across to yell at Jan, who was retreating down the alleyway, that the window got stuck. And so time is money on a film set, and you keep rolling with it. And so she expresses her frustration. So by the time, as you might remember her trying to jam that window frame, you might even be sharing that frustration as you recall it. So by the time she delivered the line, not happy Jan, you know, her frustration was at a level that was really what the most memorable aspect of that kind of pressure was, and that's what connected, engaged people, and that's the bit that they carry forth. So of course it had nothing to do with Yellow Pages. But
Yeah.
Sometimes you get lucky in marketing.
But that is just marketing gold. And I think all of us who remember that ad, it still brings a smile to our face. Moving on to your current work that you do around changing behavior, I wanted to just really talk about that for a moment, because again, it's really important that in the dental space where we work, there's lots of behavior that we seek to change, either with our patients or indeed with our teams. I wanted to ask you why you think behavior change is such an important part of the toolkit for business owners these days. How is it that that's become an important part? And I guess moving beyond that is, what does it actually mean when we talk about behavior change? I know it sounds obvious with the words, but is there more to it than meets the eye?
Yeah, totally. Because fundamentally, people don't want to change. So, you know, I'm happy with the way I live my life. You're happy with the way you live yours. And the idea of, hey, we could do things differently, wouldn't that be fun? No, not really, because I'm happy the way that I'm doing it. So whether it be to say to a customer that actually you need to come in every 6 months or every 12 months, or you need to floss, or you need to do things differently to maintain preventative health, customers, they're not going, yeah, I need another thing to do in my day. So customers don't like to do things differently. Don't like to do things differently. So when you say to people, hey, look, this is what modern dentistry or best practice, world-class service looks like today, some of the older dentists just want to turn up and do their thing. They don't want to talk to a customer. They don't want to take them through or explain why we are doing this treatment to you. They just want to do the way that they have always done. So there's a whole different way of doing things that require, in essence, people to do something different tomorrow than they did yesterday. And whether that be in a work team or whether that be a customer, generally speaking, we want people often to be doing things differently. Now, if we want that to happen, people do not wake up of their own volition and decide that. So an older dentist doesn't wake up one day and go, actually, I finally am hearing around what others are saying about customer service, and I now actually need to do more than grunt at the person in the chair. And leaders don't say, actually, I've been thinking about that poor millennial. They must have a terrible time if they've lost their phone. That must be awful for them. Maybe I could be nicer in the way I treat them. So it doesn't happen like that. So generally what happens is we have to put in place some form of interaction or communication or something that provokes people to think differently and develop a different attitude or a different behaviour. And they're not going to do it if we don't. So that's why behaviour change, I think, as a concept has become more important. And people will also talk about aspects of motivation or whatever it may well be. But in our mind, it comes down to a very simple essence, and that is if you want someone to do something differently tomorrow than they did yesterday at any point in your business, then you will need to think about how you're going to achieve that.
So do you think that the reluctance to change, obviously we're all a bit hardwired to do the things that we like to do, but let's just use the example of a business owner goes to a conference, comes back all enthused, has this new way of changing the world and wants to implement it first thing Monday. And usually by Friday, the team have dug their heels in long enough that the business owner abandons the proposed change and the status quo permeates and persists. I guess what I'm trying to ask the question is, if people are hardwired to stick with the status quo, how is it then that things do get changed? Yes, there's a communication strategy, but is it somehow there's a blinding flash of the obvious that people suddenly go, I get it, but I suspect not. Yes, there's a communication piece there, but is it that people change because there's something in it for them, or is it because they see that there's a better way? What is the successful elements of behavior change? I guess precedes the change.
Yeah, it's about understanding a compelling why. And so you're quite right. It is about what's in it for me in any of those scenarios, whether it be for a team member, whether it be for in a customer service kind of view, what is the benefit for that being the case? And so often, the benefit is, I'm constantly talking to government at the moment, and they want everyone to move to the internet. And I get why they want that to happen. It is cheaper for them to do it. They don't have to provide customer service. I get exactly why they would want to. But the problem is that it's the government's why. It's not the person's why. At the same time, the person doesn't want to move to that. You've got a whole lot of older Australians who find that very scary. They're not internet literate. They want to talk to a person. That's the conversation they want to have. So fundamentally, you're already talking about a disconnect where it may be clear on one side of the equation about what the why is and why it makes a whole lot more sense. And I think this does happen a lot in business. We may, in small business in particular, we're also busy that things that you can do that will make it more efficient or better or more appropriate. It's actually more about what works for us as the business, not necessarily what works for the customer. And the same with your teams. It may well be more because this is going to result in a better outcome from the organisation's point of view, but it may not be the better thing for the dental nurse or the admin assistant or however that works. So part of the benefit of behaviour change is kind of grounded in the theory of work with what the person actually believes to be the case and you will find an angle. Because there is always an opportunity to find the why, but you just need to work hard at finding out how to craft your message in a way that is relevant and compelling to them, that touches on their why.
And I guess thinking about that, doing that with a group of people, everyone's going to have their own intrinsic motivations. Everyone's going to have their own what's in it for me attitudes. I guess then you're looking for the commonalities. You're looking for the things that are going to be spread across the whole team. What is the common why for the team, not just what's the common why for Bob or Mary or Peter or whoever, and then crafting a message around that. Coming to the why, is it an emotional why? Is it a logic why? Can we logic people into behavior change, or does it have to come from emotion?
In our view, it is much more compelling if it comes from emotion, but it's not the only way. And the reason we say that is I'll give you a couple of very quick examples. We have never had more data and evidence what the right foods are to eat as a population. We know more about sugar content, fat content, carbohydrates, all that kind of yada yada. And yeah, there's a fair amount of disagreement in that as well. But basically, we have never known more about what to eat than we know now, and we have never been as obese. So clearly, as a population, there is not a straight line relationship between knowing and doing. Otherwise, we would be in a completely different scenario. And I can tell you that as myself, I am not a svelte size 8 person. I know what I need to be eating, but the reason that I eat more than I should at those times is all to do with tiredness, self-esteem, feeling good about myself, feeling bad about myself, my role modelling behaviour, the opportunities to reward myself. There's a whole lot of all of those aspects are actually emotional. None of them. I don't know the calorific difference between a Snickers bar and a lettuce. They're not data issues. They are. And I think we spend a lot of our time in business stamping emotion out and saying that those things are not relevant. But I can tell you, when a young person or any person leaves an organisation, or if they're lying in bed at night feeling unhappy, the same is on the upside of what they learn. They're not sitting here going, I love working there because Freddie really knows how to do a fantastic Gantt chart. The way they fill in those boxes, and gee, I could learn from that. They're not talking about the functional, rational stuff they can learn, because they can learn that at any dentist. Talk about what the emotional aspect is of what it feels like, and do I feel valued working in this team, as opposed to where I could feel doing exactly the same job somewhere else.
Okay, so if we understand that it's emotions, and if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds as though that staff engagement or lack of engagement particularly is more focused on what's missing rather than what's actually present, because they might feel that they can get what's present elsewhere, and so they're focusing on what's missing. Is that a fair assessment, or have I misunderstood you?
No, I think it's probably in reality a bit of both. So in behaviour change, we talk about both a carrot and a stick approach.
Yep.
So if we're asking people not to drink and drive, the stick part is we will fine you. So you will get fined. And the carrot approach is more around how do I feel when I'm putting others at risk? How would I feel if my family were hit by a speeding car, so on and so forth. So we know when behaviours are entrenched that trying to change them, and even if it's just habit, so it's actually just a habitual behaviour, that you need to employ a range of different tactics. And we would often say that emotional is stronger, but also you have to have a factual understanding as well. So you kind of have to have both, half and head, we say.
Yeah, okay, cool. I want to just shift gear for a second, Penny, and this may or may not be related to the work you do, and if it's not, that's fine. I'll just edit it out later. But I did want to ask you about pricing and why people choose a premium offering over a discount offering or a discount offering over a premium offering. And I'm wondering what the psychology is going on there. I understand that some people might see things as a commodity and therefore milk is milk is milk. You know, you can have your dairy farmer's milk or you can have your Coles milk. But when it comes to services, what is the behavioural elements, or what are the behavioural elements that are occurring as people make those choices? Is it simply a matter of commoditization, or is there more to it going on again?
I love this conversation because price is absolutely one of those things. Why does somebody buy a $1,000 pair of shoes?
Yeah.
Why is that? So clearly for some people, again, if we think about it being heart and head, it represents much more a purchase about their self-identity, about their belief system, about their values than it does anything else. Otherwise, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody buy a white T-shirt from anywhere apart from Big W or Kmart? Because if it's white T-shirt is a white T-shirt is a white T-shirt, then what? Why would you possibly buy a completely plain white T-shirt for $80 from Gant, or whatever, however a sexy brand name is, when you could just buy one for $9.95 at Kmart? So clearly we know that a lot of the decisions that you take in life are based on your self-identity, and then pricing has a lot to do with how that works. And I love it even more so when we talk about services, because I look at the whole bulk billing system and go, that is an attempt to take price as a driver out of it, and yet you still see people who know that you could get this for effectively nothing but choose to pay extra. So why is that? What on earth would they be assuming that they're going to get by paying more to get exactly the same as the one across the street? So let's imagine that there's a street and over there you've got a bulk billing healthcare service, and on this side you've got that straight away sends a message to people, and they have a set of expectations. So I would say to you, Jessie, straight away, this one's going to cost you $20 and this one's going to be free. What might the difference be in how the waiting room looks?
Of course. Yeah, it's going to be more elegant. You're going to have more high-end magazines. You're going to perhaps have other things like coffee or water or other little value-add things along the way, right?
And even though both of them have had to go and get the same degree, as in their actual qualification, do you think it's possible that one might be better than the other?
It's possible, but not necessarily.
Not necessarily. So there are going to be some people who have the savvy gene who go, you know what, for me this is a whole game of getting the same thing that all the toffee people get and not having to pay more for it.
Mm-hmm.
So you will have some people who absolutely gravitate towards that. And at the same time, you will have some people who go, I just don't feel comfortable. You get what you pay for. And frankly, I would rather, when it comes to my health, I would rather be sure and sit in a nice surroundings and read a nice magazine. And I've got a bit more time, so I'm happy to do that because that's what aligns more with what my belief system are. And there'll be another 10 different positions than those two that we just quite in a simplified status came up with. But it's just not right to say that everybody will go, oh, well, why would you pay more? Because if that's the case, we wouldn't have luxury goods, I'm telling you now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the communication when selling luxury goods or indeed luxury services? What are the emotions going on? Is it status? Is it prestige? Is it confidence? Is it wanting to impress the people walking down the street? What is it that we're actually in the business of selling in a prestige market?
So generally speaking, we would say it's about making the person feel better about themselves. And So, that luxury segment is one of the ones that has sustained the highest growth in the last 10 years.
Exactly.
I thought it was such an interesting thing post the floods, I think it was in Brisbane a number of years ago. You may have heard about this as well, but
I was living there at the time.
A group of hairdressers went in and offered a whole lot of services for free, because when people are in, I think it might have happened post bushfires in Victoria after Black Saturday as well, that there is a situation where their sales actually increased. And this at a time when people had nothing. They were destitute. And what did they do? Hairdresser went up. It's a very well-known factor that in a bad economy, the biggest sellers in supermarkets are alcohol and chocolate.
Wow.
This is people rewarding themselves when they're having a less than average time. Now, those bits aren't luxury. They're just everyday people. But we are also hardwired today to very much reward and treat ourselves and make ourselves feel better. There can be no other reason about why anybody would watch Married at First Sight than that. It ain't a documentary. It is absolutely, all those reality shows are about making you feel better about yourself and about your lot. And so luxury goods is really just taking that kind of a more dramatic way. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It's really interesting, actually, Penny, because some years ago, this is going to sound ridiculous when I say it out loud, but we had our first dental practice in Canberra and we had capacity issues and we were booked miles out. And in an attempt to thin out my patient base, which sounds completely counterintuitive in today's competitive market, I put the fees up. I can't remember exactly what percentage, but it was a good 15%. Like, it was a decent hike in fees. And perversely, I got busier. People still grumbled about the fees a little bit, but they stayed and I got busier, and it almost became a bit of a bragging rights, like my dentist is more expensive than your dentist kind of routine, which sounds weird when I say it, but it was quite odd.
It's not weird to me. And so I think the single biggest thing I say to small business people is get your prices up. When you're doing business with someone else, if you approach it the way that I believe, like I do, this conversation, and I'm not being paid for this conversation, if I'm being paid even, my view of that is it is a gift. And I am working hard to give you that gift, and I am being paid fairly for that gift in return. And I know if I'm going to put 150% into the transfer, the value exchange, then I know if I do that you actually will be happy to recompense me appropriately, the same way that I am when I get good service at a restaurant or whatever it is that I believe. So invariably, there is room for more margin if you give the gift across. When you run into difficulty is when the gift is shitty. It's not a gift, right? You're taking the customer or your teams, you're taking advantage of them. You're not giving them the neither the heart nor the head. You're not paying them due seriousness or respect in the relationship. And therefore, that's what happens when you give socks and jocks at Christmas time. You're demonstrating no thought whatsoever into your value exchange. So I personally think when you're in a market and people look me in the face and says, we cannot charge any more than that, within reason, I'm obviously not saying, right, everyone go out now and increase your fees 20% overnight. But if you are looking at yourself in the mirror is my great test. If I look at myself in the mirror and I practice looking at a customer and going, this is going to cost you whatever it is, I can say that with real conviction and still feel proud, and that at the end of the day that I can do a good job and that would be a great gift, then that is my litmus test.
And I really like that, because what's really interesting at the moment is, in dentistry, yes, there are more dentists in the marketplace than perhaps there's ever been. Don't have the stats immediately at hand, but it's certainly a more crowded marketplace than it ever was when I was a new graduate, that's for sure. And what's also happening is we're seeing corporatization, we're seeing roll-ups and concentration of ownership, health fund activity in the marketplace as well. And there seems to be an attempt by some of those larger players to try to commoditize it. And so for the smaller players who don't want to get caught up playing that game, because it's a bit of a losing game when you're trying to compete in that space on price, I guess, from your perspective about having that conversation of how to change behavior, how to position yourself, it really comes back to what is the exchange of value? What's my relevant price point that I can look myself in the eye and feel comfortable and happy about? And then from there, how do I communicate that? And I guess the other thing is coming back to the two practices across the street from one another. How do you elegantly communicate why I'm charging $20 and they're not? So there's a whole strategy behind that, correct?
Totally. And I also say to a lot of my clients, there's no right or wrong when it comes to marketing. There's just implications. Now, we did all of the research for Specsavers before they came into this country, right? So we're behind that. So I understand intimately the model that you're talking about and what that actually means and the pros and the cons of it, right through from the franchisees through to staff through to customers. So I totally get it. And I would look at both your traditional corner optometrist, which is the same as in dental, and say that's not right or wrong, that model, but that's got some implications. And then I would look at the Specsavers model and go, that's not right or wrong, it's just got implications. So the thing about marketing is that any market has a number of what we call positionings. So whether that be a luxury positioning or middle of the road positioning or a price fighter positioning or a family owned positioning, there's always room for a range of those in most markets. And the worst thing you can do is actually not deliver consistently to whatever that positioning is. People know that. So if I was to, let's talk about auditing services, right? And I'm only saying that just because let's just pick something that deliberately none of us know anything about or not much. So let's just go, okay, a very large auditing firm like a KPMG, for example. So again, none of us know anything about it, but straight away we know that it is large. What does that tell you straight away that it's going to be in price?
It's going to be more expensive.
Absolutely. And then what about speed to service? Like in terms of who's going to be working there, how quickly would it be that you would get stuff changed or done for you?
You would hope quickly because you're paying that premium, depending on whether you're being offloaded to a junior or you've got the partner, I guess.
Exactly right. So we're even having that conversation now about the type of people who would work there. It's going to be large. I think most people would say in general terms it's going to be slower than what other options may very well be. You might have some very sort of senior experienced people, but you know that the place is also filled up with lots of juniors. Now, I mean, I have worked with the KPMGs, but lots of us may not have. That's what one market dynamic is, that people understand that that's what happens. Even if you've never been in that market before, your expectations govern that. Now, let's say you're going to open tomorrow. And so we now decided we're going to quit dentistry and we're going to go into the world of chartered accountancies or I don't know, whatever it is they do. So we're going to open up with 3 people as opposed to the thousands that are there. So straight away, our position is we're smaller. What would that mean if we're making a decision tomorrow about our pricing? What would we expect to do with our pricing in comparison to them?
Well, again, you would expect traditionally perhaps for that to be a bit cheaper, but you could go more expensive and be boutique and be nimble.
Absolutely.
So you could go either way, potentially. You've got lower overhead, so you might have more flexibility around your price structure. But you could say, when we're actually not the big boys, we're a boutique agency and we're going to give you a high degree of personalised care, you're going to get a partner and therefore the fee structure is higher. But again, I see you could make a case either way.
Exactly right. But what you have to do is be consistent. Because I would
Absolutely.
agree with you. No right or wrong, there's just implications.
Yeah.
Because if you do decide to go more expensive, can you hire juniors?
No, probably not. You're going to be looking for the main man or woman to be on your file and doing the do.
Absolutely. If you're going to go cheaper, could you hire juniors?
Yeah, potentially.
Totally. So do you see that the decisions that you make about the position that you are in, the first thing you have to do is make sure that the delivery of the business is consistent with that positioning. We see lots of occasions where, and certainly the corporates try and say we can do all of those sorts of things, but we also know that they can't. Like you just literally can't go to market like that in a model like that. But what it also means for you is if you're going to take the anti-view and say I'm going to be the smaller or the more personalised, you absolutely have to do that. And unfortunately, what I see with lots of small business is that they become clear around what they want to do, but then they get sucked into not delivering the way that they have in their mindset. They try and play the corporate game when they're not a corporate.
Yeah.
They say that they'll provide more premium service, but then they don't invest in the waiting room, the cup of tea, the right amount of time to actually give people that premium experience. And then they sit back at the end of 6 months and go, this isn't working for me. I can't understand why it isn't. So it requires you to be really honest with what you deliver.
Absolutely. I can tell you in our practice, we go for the more boutique end, and it's really interesting. You talk about the unspoken things, or you alluded to the unspoken things, and we serve our tea and coffee in Vera Wang Wedgwood cups.
Totally. It's about that consistency. And if you hired a new young person at your front of desk and they had a purple mohawk, right, as an example, they may be an awesome front of house person, but is that, in terms of their rational skill set, they may be very good, but if they had tattoos all over them, a purple mohawk and studs, would that be the right thing to do? Is that the right fit for that business?
Absolutely not. And you're touching on a really interesting point. And this is totally random, but it's relevant, but it's just my own thing. Our brand, as I mentioned, is quite boutique, and I've got a thing about visible tattoos for that exact reason. And yet tattoos today are so commonplace, and it's a very tough juggling act not even juggling act, finding enough really good people that aren't tattooed, as it turns out in Canberra. So
it is. I get that. And it's not off track at all, Jesse. This is about the brand. This is why I go, there's no right or wrong. So to me, in a marketing sense, that's not passing a value judgment on someone with a tattoo. There are implications. And if the direction of the business is about a premium offering, and for whatever reason, those sorts of customers don't feel comfortable with an environment which has somebody tattooed in a purple mohawk, I don't have a view. I've actually got a kid that's got a mohawk. If that's what he wants to do, that's fine. However, when it comes to delivering a service and upholding a marketing position, that is actually delivering consistently is the most important thing that you can do.
Yeah, wonderful. Penny, I wanted to shift gear a little bit again because, we could talk about marketing forever and a day, and it's obviously a topic that you have got a massive breadth of experience in, and it's a topic that I have a huge interest in. I do want to just talk a little bit about strategic direction more broadly, and I know you do work in that space as well. I'm interested to think or to ask about, for those people listening to this program, the idea of strategic planning sometimes comes back to, I've got the back of the envelope or the back of the beer coaster, and I'm going to map out, my next 5 years on the back of an envelope. Clearly, that's not adequate. Clearly, a lot of small businesses need a bit of help in that space. So if you were thinking about strategy, just again, in broad chunks, what are the elements that you think a small business owner needs to think about when they're considering a strategic plan or thinking about the strategy of their business more broadly?
It is similar in the sense that to the behaviour change stuff, and I know we talked, I think, off air around, does it look like the sort of things that we get involved in are very disparate, and how do they hook up? They hook up in the sense that in all cases it's around where do you want the behaviours to go in the future. Now, certainly when you're talking about business ownership, as a small business owner myself, we obviously spend a little bit of time, or quite a lot of time, talking around what we want our vision to be. But the main reason that we do that is not just because I'm actually not averse to a bit of back of the envelope, to be completely honest, because we're all sort of pretty busy, and I'd probably rather have one great envelope than 40 pages of stuff that doesn't get to the point.
Or something that doesn't see the light of day. You spend hours creating a document that just sits on a shelf. It's pointless, right?
Yeah. And that nobody else in the organisation buys in with you.
Exactly.
Like if they're not into it either, then you've got Buckley's. You can't make it happen on your own, generally speaking. So it is much more important for it to be a shared enterprise and for people to be on the journey together than it is to have a fantastic plan. Having said that, as a start point, we always go, where do we want to be in whatever that future period of time is? Because as a standing start, we believe if you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there. And the best way to get distracted is just to plod down here for a while and get distracted. Oh, look at this over here, or look who's opening around the corner from us, or look what's happening here, and get sort of sucked into what seems to be the right thing for a while without much of an understanding about what the bigger picture is. Whereas if you sit here and go, well, this is what I want the business to look like in 2 years' time or 5 years' time, and you've got a clear picture of what that looks like and everybody is in agreement that that's where we're headed, then it's easier to work back from there and go, well, if that's where we want to go, what do we need to change between to get there? So it tends to keep you more on track if you actually set that future vision at however far out that is, and then work out what actually needs to change, if anything, in order to get to that. So that's why the behaviour change stuff comes back in again, because you go, we are going to get exactly where we want to without actually having to change anything. Awesome. That's fantastic. And it's half of the back of an envelope because you don't need to worry about it. Implicit in that is what else is going on and what will my same customer be doing in 5 years. And this is where organisations, and I'm sure you've had people come on and talk about disruption and what that means. I would be hopeful that the current corporatisation that you're seeing, in my mind, started as an example when Specsavers came in. I'm sitting here right now as an example looking at vet clinics and going, if there's a whole lot of veterinarians out there thinking that they are not right for the next version of Pet Savers, or, do you know what I'm saying? And to go around and go into market by market and suck them up and put it under a brand name and corporatise it, then they would be stupid for not thinking about that. I don't know anything about vets. I don't even have a dog or a cat. I'm looking at that and going, Blind Freddy should be able to say to you in 5 years' time, somebody will be in that market doing exactly what Bupa are doing in dental and what Specsavers did in optometry. That is what we can see happening.
It's already happened.
Oh, well, there you go. I'm behind the times. Apologies. So I actually worked with Terry White, in the days before Chemist Warehouse came in. This is now behaviour that is very obvious. So I would hope that in the business planning conversation that many of your dentist practices would have seen this coming, and have a conversation around who, where, how, what does this mean? What will customers do? What can we learn from the Specsavers? What can we learn from if we want to not be part of the corporate? And if you want to be part of the corporate, well, it's fine. Either way, there is no right or wrong. There is just implications. Depending on what we want to do in 5 years' time, what can we learn from those others that say, what would we need to do now in order to achieve the outcome that we want?
Absolutely. So let's just go back to optometry for a second, because I know you're intimately familiar with that market, having done the work with Specsavers. If you were an optometry practice that did not want to participate in the corporatisation, and there'll be, obviously the translation here is for people listening to the program who are dentists that don't want to participate in the Bupa type roll-up or whatever, what sort of strategies have you observed? And I know we're coming back to some of the things we've already spoken about, but what strategies have you observed that successful, independently owned optometry practices have done to stay relevant, to stay profitable, and indeed carve out their own niche or market share in that particular space?
Yeah, I know you said before that not very many dentists can afford necessarily to go and do some research.
Well, large research as well. I'm thinking like focus groups, polling, and all that sort of stuff. So
I would, and I'm not a big lover. We started talking about standard surveys. I don't think they work for those of us that ever banked with the Commonwealth Bank. I think it was 5 years ago. They had a strategy at the end of an interaction, and they actually said to you, the teller said to you, how would you rate my service? I would defy anyone to look someone in the face and go, actually, I found you really average today. I'm giving you a 2 on your way out the door. I mean, unless you had a really shitty experience, that's not going to happen. Yeah. So people don't tell the truth in those things. However, in independent research, when it's not you, they will. And that's why we, as an example, do quite a lot of research, very small scale. I'm about to do one where I'm literally asking 4 customers for a business, but they're 4 of the right customers, and they're customers that we know will give a very open and honest perspective to me. Yes. They won't give it to the person who's employing us, but I know that they will to us when we are not as engaged. Now, what we found with the optometry stuff was that the reason Specsavers was so successful and have been so successful, to be honest, is that a lot of the independents weren't doing a good job.
Yeah.
And so they had situations where, if we go through each one of those and understand where it is at, so if we take product first, which is the 4P, the 4th P, if we look at products from an optometry point of view, many people would go, but the range isn't very good. It's dusty, they're not on very nice shelves. And for something that is now about a fashion statement, when I go in there, also even the product of the waiting room, the carpet's a bit tatty, you can't get a good cup of tea there, you're often kept waiting for ages, and then the guy kind of shuffles out and doesn't say much to me. And yes, I've been going to him forever, but the frames are just really, I have lots of confidence in him in terms of the product as an optometrist, but actually I don't have much of a great experience. So first of all, Specsavers in many cases have provided a better product.
Yes.
Now, some would argue that that's not the case, but for a section of the market, the same as there'll be a section of the market that will go, I just want the best possible service. I don't like having 1,000 frames. It freaks me out. I want less choice. And they're the ones that are still with an independent.
Yep.
Product. Let's talk about the pricing. There is no reason for large slabs of the market. Before they came on board and you had to go to OPSM, you were paying and they were having a very, very healthy margin.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an opportunity for Specsavers to undercut price quite significantly. It fits with their model and still supply a reasonably good standard of product.
Yep.
And you talk about place. So they decided to move into the big majors as well as the local strips. They focus on things like parking, where that is important, because they did some research with their customers and said, what is the most important thing? And some of them said parking is really critical. So where they are is a key part, distribution in terms of where they sit. That may not be the case for many of us as dentists. It's not an option to suddenly just pop up and move somewhere else. But I would also argue, if you've made a decision that you want to be premium and that's where you're wanting to position yourself, then you must move away from the bottom end of town. You cannot uphold that. And which one have we done? Price, place, promotion, product. I think we've done them all.
Yeah.
So the most consistent thing with marketing is getting those 4 Ps right. And the research can sometimes tell you whether or not you actually are delivering that or not.
So just coming back to that survey that you mentioned, because I did make the comment off air that when we're talking about focus groups and things like that, most dentists wouldn't do it. But if there's a dentist listening to this podcast now and they wanted to commission some research, could they call you and say, hey, is that the sort of work that you do? Is that the sort of space that you could operate in, and give them some thoughts around what your best customers are saying and getting that really honest and candid feedback about what's working and perhaps what's not?
Absolutely. They could. And they could also, there's various people that they could call, different marketing companies and so on like that. And yes, we would certainly do that. And what's important around it, I guess, is not even so much, we talk about, and you and I started to discuss this off air as well. So again, let's just quickly recap on it because I think it's a really important principle. If you think about a frequency distribution curve, right? So that's the bell-shaped curve of anybody in a target audience. So this could be a customer, but it also could be your groups of teams of people who work for you. So if you think about that frequency distribution curve, we know that generally in any market, there is between 0 and 15% of what we will call your lovers or your evangelists to start off with. So they are the people who, if they're a customer, you can keep them waiting for 20 minutes and they don't complain because they're just so grateful to see you. If it's someone who works here, they constantly go the extra mile. They are awesome people. You can ask them to work back. They're the first ones to say yes. I think you and I laughingly talked about, remember those toys when we were younger of a clown and you filled them up with water in the base, and it doesn't matter how hard you hit them, they pop up smiling maniacally at you. God love them. But generally speaking, there's not very many of them. And at the other end of the scale, there is also between 0 to 15% of what I would call your rejectors. So again, they're customers that, frankly, we all look at each other in the tea room and go, why are you still coming, mate? Why don't you just go somewhere else? You'd be so much happier. But it's their career and their life's work is to come and be miserable. And you'll have some customers and you'll have some workers that are like that. You could give this employee a $20,000 increase and they would still complain around how miserable they are. And then you have between sort of 70 to 80% of the people in the middle that are ambivalent. And I often refer to these people who, they just got a life. They're perfectly happy. They've got other things that are more important than giving you feedback, either if they work with you, it's terrific. They turn up, they put in. They don't spend as much time as you do thinking about the 5-year plan, that's for sure. And they've got their own worries to think about. So let's say, for example, there's a survey that you put out, and it could either be a customer satisfaction survey, so some people have them sitting on the desk. It could also be, for bigger practices, some may very well do staff satisfaction surveys. You put those surveys out, who in the bell curve do you think are the first people who fill out those surveys?
Oh, lovers.
The lovers do it first, right? So that's spot on. They do it because they go, oh, great, a chance to give positive feedback and tell them how much I love working here. People who've had a great experience are only too happy to talk about it. Who goes next?
Probably the haters.
Absolutely. Here's an opportunity to tell you how miserable you're making me by either working here or, I had a terrible experience. I'm going to tell all my friends. The last people to fill out are actually the largest segment. It's not that they love the service and it's not that they hate the service. It's just they've got stuff to do. Generally speaking, it's not that, and if you think about how often, I don't know what you do, Jessie, but nowadays, when you go to a hotel and stay the night and before you've even driven out the car park, you've got the survey about please tell us how you stay. Well, I don't do any of them, do you?
No, can't be bothered.
I can't be bothered either. And it's not that I don't care. I work in marketing, for God's sake. I do care, but I just can't be bothered. And I'm probably more engaged than your average person. I've just got a life. And I don't spend my life really telling other people how to do a better job most of the time. So from that point of view, the people you hear least from are generally those that are ambivalent, but often they actually hold the key because they will give you an honest appraisal of what's happening.
Yeah.
In a research sense, sorry, I feel like this has been a long way to get to the point, but when we ask to speak to customers, and this is what we would be saying to any dentist that rings, we would be saying, we want you to hand pick some lovers, because what's good about your evangelist or your lover, that small percentage, is that for whatever reason, they've seen something in us that we would find useful. So whatever it is, if you speak to a couple of lovers, you will get an understanding of what they think is so fantastic. And then we would say, give us as many ambivalent as you can.
Yeah.
So sometimes the hardest bit is for the dentist to kind of identify who sits in what bucket. There's also no point in just speaking to lovers, because I'm going to come back and say to you, everyone thinks it's awesome, and you're going to go, well, why aren't they coming in more droves then, if that's the case?
Yep.
So just lovers is no use. Just haters is totally pointless, because we don't want them anyway. We want them in somebody else's practice.
Yes.
Are serving no value.
Yep.
What we need to do is hear from the ambivalent. So what dentists have to do is really spend some time, whether it's your staff or whether it's your customers, trying to work out, who do I think the ones we need to speak to, a couple of them, the ones that really can see the best of us. But then we actually need to speak to people who are respectfully kind of disengaged.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just say someone does that particular survey, we get the feedback from those particular groups. Now, of course, we don't have any working feedback to utilize for the purposes of this example. What then do you do with that data? Clearly you're going to use it, but what typically would you do as a marketing professional to slice and dice that data and come up with some meaningful thought processes for the business owner?
Yeah. So in bigger ends of town, we do have heaps of data that we can cut and dice and so on and so forth to do that from. When you're talking about much smaller scale thing, the next conversation is normally what we call an activation workshop, where we pull the whole team together and go, this is what we found, this is what we're doing well, and this is what the people are saying. Now, again, if your desire is to be a low-cost provider and the feedback you get from everybody is that the tea and coffee is crap, or in fact there isn't any tea and coffee, as a group, we would then say, but in the future, does that mean that we should put in tea and coffee?
Maybe, maybe not if we're going to be a low-cost provider. Maybe we put in our Nescafe Blend 43 or whatever it is.
Because in 5 years' time, this is where it does go back to us for the business strategy. If we've decided that the position we want to be in the future is exactly where we are now, and it's a low-cost provider, then we are not just going to go and increase our overheads by putting in great coffee.
No.
That is not the position that we want to consistently occupy. And we have to take all of the staff on the journey with that, because I often also say to people internally, your dental assistant, your admin people, they kind of notionally pretend they all had a business card, and most of them don't, but you need to kind of go notionally, pull out your business card, add comma, and then write marketing director on that card.
Yep.
Everybody, particularly from front of house onwards, is responsible for marketing the position and explaining to people, or being and living the experience of where this market, this business is at. Because the person with the purple mohawk, as compared to whoever it is doing your front of house as an example, they're the first ones that are delivering the impression of what the position of this business is.
Director first impressions. Absolutely. Penny, you have been incredibly generous with your time today and your wisdom and your knowledge. And oh my God, I could talk to you for about 5 days straight, and I feel like we'd only ever scratch the surface. If I was to ask you to think about the gospel according to Penny, which is the things that you think must be etched in stone for a small business owner to really kind of thrive and survive in any marketplace, changing or otherwise, what sort of things would you leave the audience with as a bit of a parting thought?
Yeah, and I do have 3 laws of marketing that I don't know if you read that or if you just got lucky. But my first law of marketing is know what it is that you're famous for. Because I often talk about a career in advertising was about building fame for products. But It's also about building fame for teams or fame for your business, whatever it is. What are you famous for? And as I say that, it goes back to both the heart and the head, the functional and the emotional. So what am I delivering functionally? But even more importantly, what kind of fame, what service is this? How do I want someone to feel when they leave the front door having had an interaction here? Are they feeling clever because they didn't pay anything for a service? Are they feeling pampered? Are they feeling confident because they see the same person every time? Are they feeling like they're being a good mother because they're getting the best possible thing they can for their children? How do they feel? So what do we want to be famous for? So good businesses, the first law, know what it is you're famous for, both functionally and emotionally. The rule of marketing is deliver it consistently.
Yeah.
Once you know what you're famous for, make sure that you don't have the mohawk happening if, in fact, that's not where the position is. If the position is young, groovy, and you're next to a university, get the mohawks and the studs happening, because that's where you are and that's what it's all about. It's about making that customer base feel comfortable. Knock yourself out. So that is the second rule of marketing, is deliver it consistently. The third rule of marketing is about leverage your position. And by leveraging, I mean, once you know what it is you stand for and you are already delivering it consistently, then the opportunity is, what are all the added extras that continue to reinforce that this is the position that you occupy? Whether that be any of your 4 Ps, your price, your product, your servicing, your distribution, any of that kind of stuff. How do I make all of that tenfold? And that's really your communication efforts then.
Okay, so that is just absolute gold. I'm sorry, I'm absorbing and thinking as I go. I've got so many things I'd love to talk to you about. But Penny, once again, you have been incredibly generous. And ladies and gents, if you've been listening to this podcast, I'm going to suggest that you go back and listen to this about 10 times. And every time you do, have a notepad, because I guarantee you there'll be some other little pearl of wisdom that Penny shared that you're going to go, oh, I didn't hear that the first nine times I listened through, because this particular episode is packed with marketing gold. Penny, for people who want to find out more about what you do, the best place to head across to is essencecoms.com.au.
It is indeed. So the website is there. It is absolutely set up. We do, I will say right now, much more work at the larger company end than we do with smaller ones for sure, but it's not out of the question. But the website is, I'm just self-confessing, is not going to be full of lots of SMEs. It's going to look like it's for larger organisations, which it is.
Okay, lovely. Penny, thank you once again for taking the time out of your day to come and hang with us. I really appreciate, as I said, your wisdom, your generosity, your insights. And look, I hope we can pick up the conversation and have a round 2 or 3 or 4, because I think, as I said, I could talk to you for days.
I'd be very happy to do that, Jesse. So whatever feedback you get, if people want to know more of one of those other things. And in the meantime, people, go forth, make yourself famous, be good, and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jessie Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessiegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist.